So we will say a prayer to Rama, followed by the usual teacher-student prayer that you're all familiar with. Om Shri Rama Rama Ramati Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tatulyam Ramanama Varanani. I delight in the beautiful name of Sri Rama. Again and again, for even once remembered, the name of Sri Rama bestows a fruit equal to the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. Just to remind you how this name Rama originated, Valmiki was Valmiki, the person who allowed a great anthill to grow over him because of his asceticism and meditation. And he tried to meditate on the sound, but it came out as Mara Mara, the one that tempts us all, and got converted into Rama Rama. So therefore Rama is the opposite of Mara. That is, all virtue, truthfulness, and so on resides in the personality of Rama. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil or disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we continue with our story of Rama. Just to recap, you'll recall the great decision that was made based on boons. And just to remind you how we are all really in a potentially difficult situation when it comes to choices. Modern science tells us there's no such thing as free will, because in a deterministic universe, it cannot be so. But our experience, of course, is that we have a number of free choices. And when we don't think clearly about these choices and we allow emotions to rule, then we are in danger, really, of changing the course, in this case, the course of history, in an unfortunate way. And so just to remind you that Kaikeyi, the Dasaratha king's favorite queen, was influenced by the maid servant, Mantra, and was persuaded on the grounds of. And we can easily see how in the older times, where there was somebody who was designated Yuvaraja, something like in England, what is called the monarch designate is when he becomes king, or even before that, he could dispatch even relatives away in case they were challenging their right to succession. So we can see suspicion even in the land going back some several thousand years ago. And so suspicion, distrust, jealousy, all occupy the mind of the normal noble queen. It can occupy all our minds at any given moment as well. And so regardless of the consequences, the Rama has to leave. And Rama is prepared to leave by himself, and when the announcement has come from Queen Kaikeyi herself, King Dasaratha, unable and maybe unwilling to tell his son to go away for 14 years, in which case Bharata will rule the kingdom. And just to remind you, King Dasaratha has said, if Bharata goes along with this and is compliant in this, consciously, willingly compliant in this, then I'll have nothing to do with him. I'll dissociate with him tantamount. That's what he was saying. He cannot perform my obsequies. And Dasaratha now has a will to die because his precious Rama, his great, great hope for the nation, is now being dispatched away. And how quickly the turn of events are. So we recall now that in Britain itself, the monarch there, Queen Elizabeth, has passed away after some 70 years of loyal service. And so it now comes to a new king to take over. But it's very clear from the news reports that there is a great deal of depth of feeling about her in terms of how she did her job, her loyalty to her country, her diplomatic skills, and being thrust into an unfamiliar role, a role really that she was not trained to do. I think everyone agrees she did it extraordinarily well, taking over from her father, who wasn't also trained to take over the monarchy. Just for historical purposes, King Edward was supposed to take over in Britain. He abdicated after a short few months, and preferring to marry, in his words, the woman that I love. And so in terms of dharma, that is the harmonious action, the right action that one should do for the overall good, many critics would say that King Edward, or the former King Edward, did the wrong thing. Anyway, it shows how modern history can be just a replay of more ancient history. And here the turn of events is that Rama has to say goodbye. I think last time we mentioned also, he approaches his mother, who is unsuspecting of all of these events, and she wants to go with him, and he says, no, you have to support the king now, and you have, in his last years, because clearly that's what the king has decided, that just out of sheer grief he will probably pass away at the turn of events. So we can imagine, by feeling what the British people now are feeling, we can imagine the sentiments of the nations that are there, and sooner or later every citizen will know that this has been the case. So we can see, how does a person who is well balanced in their mind react to such news? And we can see immediately how Rama takes it in a very, very equal, steadfast way. It's reflected on his face, it's reflected in his words, and his main concern is, out of a sense of truthfulness, to support the promise that was made by his father, not to dishonor his father. And so three key people are necessary. You may say four are necessary in terms of the scenario that we face prior to his departure. Queen Kaikeyi herself has presented him with the necessary bark clothing to wander off as an ascetic. And so he's prepared to go, but naturally he has to inform key people, namely his mother, his wife, and his brother, who always accompanies him on all the adventures. You recall how it was Rama and Lakshmana together who went into the help Vishwamitra in preserving the sacrificial fires in the forest, and how it was Vishwamitra who led him to the court of King Janaka and supported him and enabled a marriage of two people who had, according to the author, met in previous lives and associated and were soulmates, two sides of the same coin. Now that has to be severed. So he has to tell his wife. What is Sita's reaction? As we would expect. Where Rama goes, Sita goes. And so there was no argument about it. She persuaded him, look, if you're going through hardships, I'm going through hardships. We'll go together. And Lakshmana also made a case. Initially, Lakshmana exhibited anger. His strategy was, never mind, we can reverse this situation by military might. We can take things in a different way, a different course. But of course, this would have been completely contrary to the principle of truthfulness and dharma, loyalty, holding to somebody's pledge, their promise, the question of honor, all of these things. And Rama points out to his impetuous brother, no. Anger is a great, great sin. Anger is a great difficulty. We read in the Bhagavad Gita how anger is one of the gates of hell, if you will, to put it like this. In other words, the reaction of anger is damaging. Modern psychologists, unfortunately, say you can express your anger as long as you don't harm anybody, forgetting that anger harms you. The person who's angry, the first victim, is the person who's exhibiting and reacting in an angry way. And this has a telling effect on physiology. It has a telling effect on the unconscious mind, the habit level, and it's not solving the problem. And philosophically, it's reacting to a situation that is essentially deemed unreal. At least we can understand this from an intellectual point of view. The whole of the Vedanta philosophy is based on this prayer, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness to light, from death to immortality. These three connected phrases tell us everything there is to know, and yet it's difficult. Why is it difficult? Because of our association, our sense of embodiment, our association, perception and interpretation of us and them in relationships, or this and that in terms of objects. And so we have to transcend the effects of evolutionary forces, what is called trigunatita. We have to learn to do that. And it should be a pleasant course of action despite everything. It should be taken up with a sporting attitude, a lively attitude, an attitude that says, let me play the game, let me play it well. So Rama is prepared to play the game and prepared to go off into the unknown. And it is not like there are forest preserves, as in the modern times, looked after by a recreation and parks department or something of that nature. Not at all. It is a dark and foreboding place. And so all of us have to step into the unknown. The future is not known by us. And we have to be prepared in terms of our character, in terms of our attitudes. And where we fall short, we have to be sure that we have the capacity to adjust our point of view. So I'm going to read from the text and pick up the story of Rama and see where we are and try to capture some of the dramatic moods that will naturally be there. So we'll pick this up where Rama goes to Queen Cosalya's dwelling. We can imagine the scene where many visitors were assembled, eagerly waiting the coronation. They don't suspect any of this drama. And in the inmost apartment, the queen is clad in white silk and before the sacrificial fire, invoking blessings on her son. This is the ancient way of connecting to the divine. And as soon as Rama enters, she embraces him and shows him who she thought was to become the Yuvaraja, to a specially raised seat. Come on, sit here. You're now about to be the king. You are Yuvaraja, that is, you are the prince destined for kingship. And so the next step will be, you'll be the king, you'll be the ruler. But Rama says, Mother, this seat is now too high for me. I'm a hermit, and I should sit on grass spread on the floor, because I have brought you news which might sadden you. So listen and give me your blessings. It's a remarkable dialogue. So you need to listen to the facts and the bad news, but apart from anything else, you need to give me your blessings. Bad news on the one side and an action on the other side that actually makes all things, all the crooked paths straight by virtue of a blessing attitude. And so he tells her briefly what has happened. Of course, we know what has happened, but he recounts the situation. He says the king wishes to give the crown to Bharata. And his command is that I should spend 14 years in the Duncup forest. So I have to leave today. And I've come for your blessings before I go. That's the main purpose, not just to give the news, but to take her blessings. But you see, as with any mother, when Cosalia hears this, she falls to the ground. Valmiki says, like a plantain tree suddenly cut down. And Lakshmana and Rama gently raised her. And she clings to Rama and cries, "Is my heart made of stone or iron that I still live?" And Lakshmana couldn't bear the sight of the queen's grief. And now he angrily speaks, "This old king has pronounced on you or on Rama a doom that is reserved for the most wicked evildoers." Because that was a typical kind of punishment, to go off and in disgrace, to leave the land. What sin or crime has Rama committed? So it's an injustice. Not even his worst enemy could find any fault in Rama. The doting old man has lost his senses over his young wife and is not fit to be king anymore. He's telling this against his own father. How can a king listen to a woman and violate dharma? Even your enemies, O Rama, when they look at you, begin to love you. But this dotard of a father sends you to the forest. Look here, brother. Let us together throw out this king and take charge of the kingdom ourselves. Kind of military coup, based on wrong information. The fact that the king had made a promise. And Rama is aware of this. So he's suggesting a military takeover. Because if you overthrow the king, you're overthrowing all the forces loyal to the king. And so, who dare oppose us? He goes on, I shall make an end of anyone who dares. Only give me leave, and I shall do this. I shall do it even single-handed. A young brother to become king, and you go to the forest. The world would laugh at this absurdity. Don't consent to this. I, at any rate, won't stand this. I shall put down all oppositions and see that you rule the kingdom without let or hindrance. Never doubt, but I have strength to do it. Instead of the sun rising, a great darkness has descended upon this land this morning. For when we were expecting your coronation, the king sentences you to banishment. Because that is normally, here is your crime, I now give you a punishment, banishment. For a long period of time, almost a lifetime. Is a kind of, instead of being sent to prison, is exporting the problem. King sentences you to banishment. In the face of such injustice, there is no use being nice and polite. I cannot stand this. I must do my duty. Mother, now you will see the strength of my arm, and so you, brother, he says, all emotionally. So you can see how in difficult situations these controversial points of view can come up. And many people may feel that Lakshmana is actually justified. Many people reading the story, even in this series, have asked a question, but why doesn't he just, for the better good of the people? I mentioned Rama has to say goodbye to 4 people. One is his mother, one is Sita, one is Lakshmana, but the 4th is the people. And so, Lakshmana's words were actually acted as some kind of solace to Cosalia. But yet the strange talk of ousting the king, her husband, and seizing the throne also frightens her. And she realizes this is not the right course. So she says, Rama, consider well what Lakshmana says. Don't exclude it. Don't go to the forest. If you go away, how can I stay here all alone among my enemies. I too shall go with you. You see, if Rama is the enemy, then Cosalia, who is not the favorite queen, will become also an enemy of the supporters of Queen Kaikeyi. And so anyway, Rama listens in silence to Lakshmana's outburst, for it was wise to let the pent-up passion find outlet in words. And then turning to Cosalia, he says, "Mother, let there be no talk of anyone going with me to the forest. It's your duty to stay here serving the king and sharing the sorrow that has come to him in his old age. How can the crowned queen of an emperor wander with me like a widow in the forest? It will be very difficult for her. This cannot be. I shall return after my term of forest life." So there's a nobility in all of this, a nobility of sentiment, rightly or wrongly directed. It's my duty, continues Rama, to fulfill my father's word. This is the basis for him agreeing. It's all the same to me, whether it's just or unjust, spontaneous, or whether it's extorted by force or by fraud. If I fail in this primary duty, it's not the right or wrong of the circumstances. It's the honoring of his father's word. And so if I fail in this primary duty, I can gain no satisfaction or good name through any amount of wealth or power. Lakshmana, your proposals are quite wrong. I know your great strength. I have no doubt that you can vanquish and destroy all opponents and secure for me the kingdom. I know also your love for me. But the way in which you propose to use it is not worthy of the dynasty to which you belong. Our highest duty, and this is very important, our highest duty, he says, is to fulfill our Father's word. He gave his word, and that's it. And if we fail in that, no other achievement can make up for it. What is this sense of satya, this sense of truthfulness, that thought, word, and deed all match together? And in this day and age, we find any plasticity in this creeping in will result ultimately in corruption. In Africa, I used to travel through 4 border posts to do missionary work. And the popular term for it was bribes and customs. You can get to the head of the queue, you can go out, instead of budgeting at least 1 hour at each border post, you say, no, I won't give anybody any money to facilitate this. I won't even give them a gift, nothing like this. And so this kind of thing may not necessarily be considered today as in any way unethical. And unethical means, a deviation from this absolute truthfulness in thought, word, and deed. And so this is the lesson that we have. So anyway, Rama, he tries to console both his mother and his brother, but Lakshmana's anger couldn't be easily put down. And perhaps it could have been if he himself, not Rama, were the sufferer, but it was Rama who was the victim of the cruel injustice and not Lakshmana. And so Lakshmana writhed in anger like a wounded cobra, says the author, and Rama took him apart, made him sit down. And I don't mean he dissected him, I mean he brought him to a private place, sat him down nicely, and he tells him, Lakshmana, are you not my other self, my very soul in another body? Listen to me. You are courageous and strong, but control your anger. If you're courageous and strong, you will make this self-control. Control your anger and control your grief on my account. Don't allow these evil spirits to possess you. Holding fast to dharma. This is the thing. Rama is the embodiment of dharma. Let us convert our present disgrace into a great joy. Maybe there's a benefit in going to the forest. Let us forget all about the coronation and think worthily as becomes our race. Consider our father's condition. Our hearts should go out to him in sympathy for his stricken with great sorrow. We shouldn't blame him. We shouldn't call him senile or anything like this. He's suffering. And whatever be the reason, he gave a promise. And if he should break it, he would be committing a shameful sin which would besmirch and blot out all his great and glorious deeds. Everybody will say he made a pledge. It's like signing a contract or an agreement, country by country, you see. In the Second World War, it was Hitler's Germany that made a pact with Stalin's Russia. And as soon as it was convenient, Hitler automatically breaks this and starts attacking Russia. Consider our Father's condition. Our hearts should go out to him in sympathy. So, whatever be the reason, we should stick by him. He is heartbroken at the wrong, and he feels he has done this wrong to me. It breaks his heart, but he's given his word. But I do not feel it a wrong at all, for a king must keep his word, and a son must obey his father. You should show that you too are free from any sense of injury. Only so can we bring him mental relief. And he continues his dialogue. He gave us the life that we hold, and we should give him peace of mind. He is afraid about the other world. We should free him from this fear. So far, we have never given him cause for sorrow or dissatisfaction. Now we have become the cause of a great fear in his mind about what is to happen to him in the other world. We can easily relieve him. Instead of doing this, are we going to add to his troubles? And for this reason, my mind has altogether turned away from this coronation and any ambition to be king, and its intent on the journey into the forest. Whatever life presents you, we should try to adapt our position. We should accept the new position, and then we should move forward in a sense of positivity, and even with a sense of adventure into the unknown. We should not be attached. It is the attachment to what we perceive as a destiny or good fortune that brings us the sorrow. We should be joyful in all circumstances. These are attitudes that we should practically cultivate in a game of life and how to play it. He continues, my sole desire now is to go to the forest and see that Bharata is crowned. Accept it, move toward it, and make the best of it. And this would please me best. And if I delay, Kaikeyi will grow suspicious, and hence I should go to the forest, not tomorrow, not next week, but this very day. And bring her peace of mind, benefit everybody. And also to rid her of the fear of the sin of breaking a promise, and be assured of my willing and cheerful acceptance of his command, and our Father will be happy. And we shouldn't be angry with Kaikeyi also, because has she also not been kind to us all these years? All the three queens treated all the sons and played a motherly role for all of them. And that one should suddenly conceive this idea that you've just mentioned, he says to Lakshmana, is surely the working of fate. We should not blame her for it. Our one proposes something and fate decides otherwise. An interesting statement. We have many, many plans in our heads. We have many desires in our heads. And all of a sudden something comes and upsets it. It's a much better strategy to accept it and use it as material to make something better from it. Then he goes on, our little mother will have to bear the grievous burden of the world's blame, but our love for her should remain the same as ever. What a noble sentiment. If before this there had been evil in her thought, her conduct would have shown it. But this is not so. There is no doubt that some higher force has made her say suddenly and harshly, Rama, go to the forest. Otherwise, how could a high-minded woman who so far looked upon us as her own children, now behaves so brazenly before her husband? Who can oppose destiny? Even steadfast sages have swerved suddenly from their topos. How can poor Kake hope to resist fate? We're all human, with human failings, and she generally a wonderful person, a good person, a noble person, and some temporary thing has happened. We should accept it. So let us resolve firmly to change this sorrow into joy. What a wonderful statement of Dharma. We have the capacity, all of us, all humans, to transform discord into harmony by taking the raw material that we have available to us, and transforming it. I'm sure I've told you many, many times about the story of the farmer who had to get water through his neighbor's land, and his land took every opportunity to ambush him with a bucket of cow dung each time and throw it over the poor man. And the farmer never knew from which direction it would come. It may come from behind a bush, it may come from up a tree, behind a rock, all kinds of things. A new position of ambush was taken on every day. And after the whole year, the farmer knocks on the neighbor's door. And the neighbor sheepishly opens the door, thinking there'll be a reprisal for this bad behavior. But the farmer instead holds out a rose flower. And he says, "You see all that dung that you gave me, all that cow manure, I managed to use it in a garden, and I planted roses. Now I'm exporting roses, and see how beautiful these roses have turned out. I want to give this to you on one condition." One condition. What is that? The neighbor says, "That in this forthcoming year, please, will you double the quota?" So whatever life has in terms of its manure or interpreted manure, the capacity to take it and convert it into something useful. Without this manure, without these components of decaying material, no flower can grow. It relies on all the nutrients in the soil, the aeration that is caused by worms and other things. It requires on air, it requires water, it requires carbon dioxide, it requires hydrogen, and it requires to make hydrocarbon things, carbohydrates, and give us nicely the residue of oxygen, and we huff and puff on it. And we munch and crunch on the carbohydrates. What a wonderful arrangement. So nature itself knows what to do, knows that there is a coordinating, synergistic operation going on in nature that is ecologically sound, and we should not disrupt it. And independently, we have the capacity through our ingenuity and our supposed free will to transform all of these interpreted discordant elements into something useful. So he says, that would be a proof of our nobility and courage to transform sorrow into joy. Let's do it. What other choice do we have? And in life, we can sit down and engage, wallow in self-pity and sorrow. But instead of getting up bravely and facing the unknown with an adventurous spirit, and we have equipment to do it. We are fully equipped. In our psychophysical frame, we are fully equipped to face every difficulty. So with the blessings of my mother and elders, he goes on, I shall go to the forest. So bring here the water from the Ganga for the coronation. I shall use it for washing before departing for the forest, because it's sacred water. And I shall use it for ablution, not for the coronation, not for anything else, just for washing, because that water belongs to the state and it's intended for the coronation. And how can we touch it in a different way? We shall go to the holy Ganga ourselves and fetch the water for our ablution. Brother, be not sad thinking of kingdom or wealth. Life in the forest will be your highest joy. So Rama reveals to his brother his inmost thoughts. And in these passages that Valmiki uses, the word deva is there. And in Sanskrit, this word devam means fate. Now, it doesn't mean to say we are fatalists or should be fatalists, but it means that we should walk into the unknown and make our own destiny and accept the fatalistic components, in other words, that things change. And despite our efforts, there's nothing we can do about it. That kind of aspect. So devam, dishtam, bhagyam, niyati, and viti. These are all words conveying the same kind of unexpected and inexplicable events in nature. When we say Shanti 3 times, we say, may peace in others to mitigate against our own disastrous actions. And then peace, in other words, a protection against other people's actions that may be deleterious to ourselves. And finally, peace because of unknown things, what insurance agencies call act of God, the unexpected. So you see, belief in God and as the prime cause creates maybe a natural confusion that arises between fate and God's will. And what Rama said to Lakshmana on this occasion doesn't mean that he thought that God's contrived the whole scene and influenced Kaikeyi for, let's say, for their own benefit. It's not that kind of thing. And so Rama offers no more than usual consolation. And it's the work of fate. Don't grieve. No one is to blame for this. It is as it is. Now, these are important passages because they apply to our daily life and how to deal with difficulties and obstacles ourselves. In Kamban Ramayana also, addressing his brother, raging like the fire of dissolution, it says, Rama says, it's not the river's fault that the bed is dry. Even so, my going home is not the king's fault, nor Queen Kaikeyi's, nor her sons. The wrong is the work of fate. Why should one be angry then? Fate, a kind of series of causal events over which we have no control. And so Lakshmana now becomes more pacified by these words, but his nature is not exactly like that. And like many of us, his anger boils up again. Very well then, he says, this is the work of fate. Fate, I grant, is the cause of our stepmother's sudden folly. And I'm not angry with her, but are we on that account to sit still and do nothing? It is a Kshatriya dharma to overcome evil and establish justice. These are arguments that people reading the story are thinking about themselves. A hero doesn't bow down before fate. And having announced Rama's coronation by beat of drum to the town and the country, the treacherous king invokes some old forgotten boon and orders you to go to the forest. I'm sure many people are thinking this. Same thing as Lakshmana. Is it manly to call this fate and obey it meekly? Only cowards go down under fate. Heroes should oppose and vanquish it. I am no weakling to yield to fate. You'll see today that might of a hero matched against fate. I shall tame the mad elephant fate and make it serve me. The wonderful poetry in anger coming out. Looking like heroism and strength. I shall banish to the forest those who conspire to banish you. And if you wish to visit the forest for a change, you can do so later. The proper time for it will be when you have reigned as king for many years, and then you can do your adventure in the forest. That was the way of your ancestors. They did this. They went out in the forest. They left everything to their sons. This is the normal way of doing things. And if anyone questions your kingship now, I personally, Lakshmana, stand here to annihilate them. He repeats it. And these two shoulders, he points out, are they muscular shoulders there just for beauty. And then he says, this bow, these arrows, the sword hanging on my side, all the weapons of a kshatriya, a military person, are they just decorations? No, I should use them. Do you think they are theatrical equipment put down for show? So I await your orders. Give me the word. Test my prowess. So Rama again diplomatically pacifies Lakshmana's rage, which was flaming up into almost conflagration. As long as our parents are alive, says Rama, it is our duty to obey them. I cannot dream of disobeying my father. It is our prime duty to do his bidding and enable him to fulfill his pledge. What joy is there in getting a kingship after insulting our parents and slaughtering Bharata, the embodiment of Dharma? He's assuming that Bharata is complicit in this. And he wiped with his hands the tears that were falling from Lakshmana's eyes. And when Rama did this, Lakshmana grew calm. You see, sympathy, empathy, and love overcomes anger. For the affectionate magic of Rama's hand could work wonders, says Valmiki. Now, what took place in the inner apartments of the palace was not yet known, of course, to the townspeople. That's the fourth component. But Rama, for his part, didn't lose any time in preparing for forest life. And he goes to Queen Cosalia to receive her blessings, as we know, before leaving the city. And Cosalia says to him again, how can I stay in Ayodhya? She says again, after you're gone, it's best that I go with you to the forest. That's her intention. And of course, she knew that her duty was to serve her husband in his old age and share his sorrow in Ayodhya, but she just needs her son to tell her. And yet, of course, her mind was still, naturally, as a mother, confused by grief. She didn't see things clearly. But Rama wouldn't hear of it, put her mind of her duty to be with the heart-stricken old king in his sad solitude and support him. So she recognized the justice of this counsel from Rama, and she gives her benedictions, she gives her sweet words, of course, all diluted with the salt of broken tears. So, do as your father has decreed, and then return in glory. And so Rama puts heart in her with a smile. The 14 years will pass quickly, and you will see me back. Now, Valmiki says that as Rama received his mother's benedictions, his bright face glowed with added effulgence. How truly he pictures the sublime loveliness that comes of a great renunciation, that illumines one's being as with an inner light. Jesus says you cannot hide your light under a bushel or a bed. It shines for everyone. And there we see the divine qualities of Rama. So we saw that Rama left Sita and went to the king in answer to the message brought by Sumant. Now Sita, of course, was expecting Rama to return in a chariot with the royal umbrella. She also doesn't know anything about this. But now she sees Rama returning alone, unattended, with none of the royal insignia, and she notes on his face the glow of some fixed resolve. And Rama was thinking as he came how he could break the news to his beloved wife. The news that his father had decreed that he was to go off into the forest. How is he going to do this? He loves her dearly, but there has to be a detachment. Something troubles the mind of my lord, thought Sita. Just thought it, but what can be the matter? He's going to have his coronation, should be a joyful occasion. What can anything matter so long as there is our love? Her emphasis is on the love. This is why Ram and Sita are the ideal example for married life. And so she asks him, what's the matter? Why do you look so strangely? Don't forget, because they are compatible, because the two are one, She is aware of his moods and every look and every glance. So Rama tells her the situation very briefly. And of course he says, I can well imagine your sorrow at having to part from me and stay here. Janaka's daughter doesn't require my guidance for her duty. You should stay here. So be thoughtful and comfort the king, and comfort also the three queens. They are your virtual mothers. Don't expect any better treatment than that given to the other princesses in the palace. Don't think that you're special because you are my wife. Be respectful to Bharata, who will be ruler and guard against any offense to his feelings also. Your love for me, I trust will not grow any less during this absence. And I'll return from the forest after these 14 years. Until then, don't neglect the customary rites and ceremonies. Mother Cosalia in her sorrow will need your attentive care. And Bharata and Shatrughna are dear to me also. And you look upon them as your brothers. Conduct yourself as befits your royal race and your own nature. Avoid extolling me so as to give possible offense to all these others. So I'm going to the forest today. Keep your mind steady and calm. Now, of course, when Sita hears these unexpected words, her love for Rama manifests itself now also as anger. That he should even think for a moment that she would consent to part from him and live in the comfort of the palace while he was a homeless wanderer in pathless forests. And she says, it's a fine speech you've just made, and I acknowledge you as a knower of dharma, but it is to me a very strange doctrine that a wife is diverse and separate from her husband, and that his duty is not hers, and that she has no right to share it, and that whatever pain you go through, I go through. No, I can never accept that. I hold that your fortunes are mine, your misfortunes are mine. Everything, every part of you is same as mine. And if Rama has to go to the forest, then this includes Sita, and Sita has to go to the forest. And I shall walk in front of you in the forest paths and so on, and tread the thorns and the hard ground to make them smooth for your feet. What a beautiful, sweet sentiment. How generous. I will sacrifice myself. I will smooth out the thorns in the way so that you don't have to suffer them. Don't think me obstinate. My father and mother have instructed me in this dutiful, ethical path, in this dharma. And what you tell me is totally opposed to what they've taught me. To go with you wherever you go, that is my only course. And if you must go to the forest today, then today, this very day, I will also go with you. There's no room here for any discussion. Don't try and persuade me otherwise. Don't think that I can't bear the forest life. I can do it. With you by my side, it'll be a joyous holiday. I shan't be a source of trouble to you. I shall eat fruit and roots like you, and I shall not lag behind as we walk. You see, if people go on holiday, some people go on holiday to forests and mountains and so on. They don't consider it a hardship because they normally have a place to stay, a lodge or something, and they've booked in advance, and they've taken an air flight and all the rest of it. But, you know, some people are camping people and some people aren't. So you say to somebody, okay, will you take a backpack, please, and some shoes, or walking shoes, and go off, and we'll set up a tent when it's nightfall, and we'll make a fire, and we'll tell stories around the campfire, and it may be a little cold, but never mind, and there may be mosquitoes, but we'll take a net. Well, there are other people more used to luxurious life who say, well, let me rather stay in a hotel. So it depends how you view adventure, and either one, if you have no choice, can be viewed as an adventure. And many people take the course Let me not take anything. Let me take bare essentials. And for me, this will be a holiday. She has this point of view. She says, I've long wanted to go to the woods with you and rejoice at the sight of great mountains and rivers. I shall spend the time most happily among the birds and flowers, bathing in the rivers and doing the daily rites. And away from you, I don't care for heaven itself. I shall surely die if you leave me behind. I implore you, I beg you, take me with you. Have pity on me, don't forsake me now. And what a beautiful sentiment. This alone, this dialogue alone, is enough to be a model for male-female relationships. Beginning in anger, her speech ends in sobs, in tears. And Rama explains to Sita a few facts. You see, life in the forest was not as easy as she thought, and set out at great length the difficulties and dangers, and again insists that she should not think of accompanying him on these grounds. I don't want you to suffer. Again, Sita's eyes fill with tears. Tigers, lions, bears, snakes, none of them will come near me. They will run away from us at the sight of you. That's the confidence I have in you. The sun, the rain, the wind, and hunger, and the spikes and thorny shrubs you speak of, yeah, I'll enjoy them all cheerfully. I'm not in the least afraid. On the other hand, you may be certain life will depart from this body if you leave me here and go. When I was in Mithila, the Brahmanas and astrologers told my mother that I was destined to live in the forest for a while. Can I fulfill this prediction alone in the forest? Here's the opportunity for me to fulfill it in your company, which will make the forest and garden of delight. For whom is forest life unpleasant? Only to those men and women who have not controlled their senses. You and I can be masters of our senses and miss nothing. So I'm imploring you, don't put me away from you, for parting from you is more cruel than death itself. There's a strength in supreme love. There's a strength which defies reason and laughs at death itself. And Rama suffered himself to be persuaded, partly because his love was great as hers, and every passionate word she spoke found ready lodgment in his heart. And partly, of course, because he was confident of his ability to protect her. So it was settled. Sita should accompany Rama to the forest. And so she sent for the poor and gave away all her belongings and prepares herself for life in the forest. And Lakshmana also decided to go with his brother and be of service to him in the forest. And Rama had to agree. And the three set off. They went to take leave of the aged king finally, without any criticism, without any sense of sorrow, simply doing his will. And then, of course, the fourth set to be advised the people themselves. And we can imagine that in the streets and on the balconies, there were crowds of people looking on through the windows and from the terraces of mansions, men and women. And they saw Rama and Lakshmana and the princess proceeding on foot like the poorest people in the land. And it filled them all with boundless grief and indignation. The people said to one another in a critical way, what kind of a king is this who sends so noble a prince to the forest? And there Sita walks, a princess that should command the service of the royal chariot. Can she bear the heat? Can she bear the rain of the forest? It's monstrous. So we shall go then to the forest too, say the citizens. Let us gather up all we have and get away to the forest with these princes. And my personal comment, now you have a potential ecological disaster. The forest where Rama dwells shall be our Ayodhya. Let these houses be deserted, be infested with snakes and rats, and let Kaikeyi rule over the ruins of Ayodhya. Wild beasts and vultures of the forest will come to stay here. This will become a forest, and the forest will become Ayodhya. Something like some of the old discovered cities that we find in Cambodia. Anyway, when Rama heard these rumors and this kind of talk going around, he takes his notice, and at the entrance of Kaikeyi's palace, Rama sees Sumantra seated sorrowfully aside in a corner, and Rama tenderly speaks to him, "The three of us have come to meet the king. So please let us enter his presence." So Sumantra goes and accordingly announces them to the king, and what a sight, of course, meets them there. Like the sun in eclipse, like an oven filled with all over with ash, like a tank gone dry, the king is stretched out flat on the floor, his great glory gone, and his face shrunken and distorted with anguish. And Sumantra, his voice trembling now with his grief and his hands clasped together, he says, "The prince waits at the entrance, and he's asking to meet with you and take your blessings before he goes away." And all he has to the Brahmanas and starts, has been given to the Brahmanas, and he's starting out for the Dandaka forest. And so the king allows it, and Rama comes in and bows to the king from a distance. And as soon as he saw Rama, the king suddenly rose and rushed with outstretched arms to embrace him, but dropped in a swoon before reaching his son. And Rama and Lakshmana, they tenderly now raise him up and put him on a couch. "My lord," Rama says, "we've come to seek your leave to go to the forest. Vaidehi and Lakshmana too are going with me, in spite of all I could do to make them desist. So the three of us are going. So please give us your blessings before we depart." And King Dasara says to them, "Well, Rama, I am bound by the boons that I have given to Kaikeyi, but you are not so bound. Why don't you brush me aside and seize the kingdom by force?" And that had long been in the king's mind, of course, as we know from previous, as the best and only solution of the cruel problem. And he himself was suggesting a course of action that Lakshmana himself had previously suggested. But Rama says, "No, I have no desire for kingdom or power. May you reign for 1,000 years more, if necessary. My heart is now set on going to the forest, and I'm even now in readiness, and I've just come for your blessings. And when the 14 years have passed, I'll return. I'll return in tender obeisance to you." And the king's faint hope that things might change was now abandoned, and he says, "My son, bring glory to our line of kings. Go, but come back unscathed, and may danger flee from your path. May you cling to dharma. You are unshakable in resolution. Firm and unchangeable is your will. But don't go away today, I ask you. Spend but this night here with me. That's all I ask. Let me fill my eyes with your sight of you just for one more day. You can go away at dawn." And like one handling a live coal deceptively covered with ash, I gave the promise to Kaikeyi, not knowing what was in her mind. But I'm now helpless and caught in her net. And you say, I shall fulfill my father's promise. I shall not let dishonor blot your name. I shall give up the kingdom and go to the forest. Where in the world can you find a son like you who is prepared to defend my honor? So I swear to you, I didn't intend to do any great wrong. The interesting phrase is caught in Kaikeyi's net. We're all caught in the web of Maya. And thus piteously the king speaks. It wasn't Dasaratha's wish to die without losing, even in his last moments, the respect of Rama. So Rama replies, "Please send for Bharata at once, fulfill the promise you have given to Mother Kaikeyi, And don't be troubled by the thought that you are doing me a wrong, for I had no desire for the throne. And don't feel it a deprivation not to have it. Untroubled by grief or doubt, make sure that Bharata is crowned and give him your blessings and cast all this grief aside. Don't shed any tears. Can the ocean dry up? So may you too not lose your balance. Ever great Father, my only wish is to make good the word you gave, that's all. And if I got all the wealth of the world but falsify your word, then what joy would that be to me? I will spend my time happily in the forest, where but in the forest you can find beauty and you can find joy. So, Father, you are my God. I take it that it is God that sends me to the forest. And when the 14 years are over, you will see me again. Don't grieve. Let your father be a God to you. Let your mother be a God to you. Let your teacher be a God to you. Let your guest be a God to you. All of this is being said in the Upanishads. What profits it that I stay here a night longer and go tomorrow? He's responding to the suggestion. Time is made up of a succession of tomorrows, and one day is just like another. Whether I go today, whether I go tomorrow, I have to go. So we are simply postponing the sorrow. Don't postpone this. Let us do it now. And well, then send for the commanders, said the king to Sumantra, and order them to get ready chariots, elephants, horses, foot soldiers. They can all go with Rama to the forest. And so I fulfill my promise, but at the same time, I'm ensuring that there's no discomfort. And along with the army, just for his protection, take all the necessary stores for Rama to live with the rishis of the forest. Let there be nothing wanted in men, money, or things. So he's going along with the principle, but not the spirit of what is being asked. He imagined that he could make Rama's exile to the forest something like a royal tour, affording just a mere pleasant change from routine and enlivened by exchange of gracious hospitalities with the sylvan population. But as he spoke, Kaikeyi, who was present, her face paled with anger. She glowered at the king, and in a voice tremulous with scornful wrath, she says, "O good and generous monarch, surely you will give Bharata this kingdom after squeezing out of it all the good it holds, as one might offer in mockery an empty tankard to a man dying of thirst. What pleasure or glory will my son have in ruling a deserted state? You're going to take all the resources and leave Ayodhya empty, and Bharata is going to come to an empty city, an abandoned city." Anyway, Dasaratha realizes, he groans in helplessness and marvels again at the cruelty that could stab a man already crushed under an intolerable burden. And so angry words rose from the mouths of those around, for even the courtiers who were around found this open heartlessness more than they could suffer in silence. But Rama puts an end to it, to all these recriminations, by saying he wouldn't agree to take paraphernalia or any of these things incongruous to the intended life in the forest. So what use have I, who am departing the forest, to live on what sylvan nature yields for an army, glittering equipment, and all of these things? After renouncing the throne, what use have I for all these things? And it would just be covetous folly, after having parted with the elephant, to burden oneself with a ponderous chain. His example. An elephant is bound in service by a chain tethered. And so he says, I'm cheerfully relinquishing all this claim to the kingdom and all the trammels and everything else. And I'm happy just with the bare minimum to go. And I'll go for 14 years of forest life. I don't need anything but bark garments made from the bark of a tree beaten with water and so on into a pliable form of clothing. And just like the rishis themselves wear, and simple necessaries of forest life, such as you take some spades and baskets, that's all. And so Kaikeyi hastened, as soon as this was said, to produce all the forest dress necessary. She'd already kept them ready and gave it straight away, without a blush, to Rama. And there and then, Rama divests himself and dresses himself in the new clothing, and in these garments, he shone like a rishi. Lakshmana too changed into the bark dress, while Dasharatha watched all this just in helpless anguish. And then Kaikeyi brings a bark dress for Sita too, and she receives it, standing bewildered, for she had never worn such clothing as these and didn't know how to change into them. And approaching Rama, who stood there resplendent with divine effulgence, Sita said shyly, "Pray tell me, how does one put this thing on?" And as Rama took up the bark dress and wrapping it over Sita's silk, made a knot over her shoulder, the ladies in waiting, they wailed aloud, and Dasharatha himself fell into a swoon. And when he regains consciousness, he, of course, loudly again reviles Kaikeyi, but she's only smiling scornfully. She has her way. The princess sought her own pleasure by going to the forest with her husband and would not be dissuaded. And so the episode ends really with the Rama saying, "Father, I leave behind my mother, Cosalia, blameless and tender-hearted lady, bereft of her son in her old age. And this sudden fate is bitter for her, and just as death, but she has agreed to live only for your sake." This whole episode is full of nobility. She's going to be by your side to share your sorrow and console you. She's incapable of harboring any unkind thought towards anyone. She's never before felt such a pang or such a poignant parting. Nevertheless, she's prepared to stay with you. Please be kind to her. And when I'm no longer here, and when I return after my long exile in the hope of putting my head on her feet, let me not hear that she has died of sorrow, a broken heart. And so, speaking all of this and tying up all these ends and responding naturally to his mother's grief, he goes like this, and Dasharatha cannot endure even watching the scene, puts his head in his hands, and Rama makes his way to his forest. He leaves his father's presence and leaves the king laying prostrate and speechless. And so next week we pick up this again. We're going into this in great detail only because that each one of these words serves as a practical lesson in our own life on how to deal with issues of the greatest grief and sorrow that we may come across in life, and we all do. So with these Valmiki's Ramayana, we'll pick it up next week. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Thank you.
Merci.
Oh.